See, now that was quite the transition as we transition over to another video. Thanks for staying with us. So, as I was saying, one of the things you'll do is really thinking about the fact that you've got almost an encounter, a set of brackets between any two shapes. You're going to think that this is a very helpful thing because you'll remember that we ask you to have 8 to 12 shapes, and of course, a bracket is a set of shapes, right? And so this might be where you might say, okay, well, I've got 6 applications and 2 data collations or whatever it is. That probably would be a silly amount to have. But the way that I'm going to add in that other bulk is through having these encounters. That's sort of the functional way that you might think of encounters. Again, what I think is really useful about encounters is they focus you in on, why am I doing this? Why am I collecting this data? Why am I making this particular application? Why am I getting to a so what from it? What am I really answering? And so it really becomes a way to get more and more specific, even though it will also be always drawing in bigger questions, all right? So that's one thing we want you to see, and this is in some ways answering everyone's question all at once, right? So in fact, to Liz, no, it's not going to look like a lot of the shapes that we've had, because one thing you'll probably be, or I'm sorry, to Bethany, it's not going to be looking like the flow that you've had before, because one thing you'll be adding in is a lot of encounters. And to people who are asking, do I need to have a grand idea? You want to have a really awesome idea that's usually going to be fueled by encounters between things, and that's really what's going to allow you to compare and contrast things in a meaningful way.
So your encounter may take the form of the kinds of questions we've already templated out over here on the right, and the things we've done throughout the semester. Also, it might answer some of these questions about similarities and differences and unique points that are there. But there's another form that encounters can take, and we're going to tell you about it here in a second, called meta commentary. So the meta is telling you that this is going to be commentary about your commentary. So this is writing about what you're saying. So
Prepare for a stunning transition.
let's move over to that. So here we are in the land of meta commentary, borrowed from Gerald Graff and Kathy Birkenstein's book called They Say, I Say, which is filled with all kinds of wonderful templates, such as these you see on the right hand of the screen here. And so their idea of meta commentary is a place where you sort of stop your argument and you speak directly to the reader about what's happening with your argument at that moment. Oftentimes you're telling them what you're not saying, or you're anticipating what objections they may raise at that point. More or less, it's a way to sort of sort out your precise purposes at that moment.
So, I mean, a way to think about it is it's really where you're being super aware of the act of reading, right? If the shapes that we've talked about, the circles, the squares, the triangles, are really how thinking happens, these encounters are really where you make the path of that thinking clearer to somebody who's reading it.
So you see, and we'll have this posted for you too, this PDF that we're looking at right now. There are all kinds of things you might want to do. You might ward off potential misunderstandings. You might alert readers to an elaboration of a previous idea. You might provide readers with a roadmap of your text. And so you see there's templates to do several of these kinds of moves here. And I would recommend, especially if you're feeling like I don't have enough shapes yet, I would strongly recommend looking at some meta commentary as a way to step back and make sure that you're making clear to a reader what you're saying. And sometimes, actually, just as a writing for discovery kind of process, sometimes when you work one of these templates, you will realize yourself what you're saying. You can have sort of a meta personal moment with your text.
And this is, again, why we're saying that an encounter will often shape not just what you're saying in that place, but it may shape what you say after it, so what that application does afterwards, but it may also go back and reshape the data collation that came before it, right? And yeah, I introduce this to students, and particularly like sort of composition students, I'll say, you're gonna love this because it's gonna make your paper longer, which is what you're looking for, and I know you guys are past that stage. But what I love about it as a teacher, and what I think you guys may love about it as teachers, is that it also really forces you to think about why you're saying what you're saying, and so you're gonna find that it generates not just length, but a lot of thought, which is really kind of awesome. One thing that I want to say while we're here, which is sort of a meta point about writing, is that we've been talking about these shapes, but you shouldn't think that these shapes are independent paragraphs. So for instance, you've seen, for instance, in our applications that we may write 2 paragraphs of application, right? So you have a data collation, you have an encounter that's probably shaping the question you're asking out of that data collation. You may get several paragraphs of application out of that. Equally, generally an encounter is not going to be a paragraph on its own. It might be, that you might have the encounter that leads to a particular so what. That might be a paragraph on its own, or it might be paired together with a collation, which might then lead to 3 paragraphs of application off of that. So we want you to remember that the shapes are really ways to think about chunks of argument, but they are not necessarily related to paragraphs of argument. and you may find yourself expanding or condensing.
And that may be a step in your writing process, is working through your Prezi and deciding, there's going to be 3 paragraphs here, or, I think this is just a transition from this section to that section. This will also look familiar to you. We're back to our Tennyson Prezi, which again we would encourage you to go back and check out, especially for some of the specific points we're going to make in a minute. But I want to take this opportunity to give a little bit of meta commentary on this paper assignment. So anticipating some ways that my readers might have misunderstood what we're asking you to do. One way is that you might have thought this was supposed to be a sort of comparison and contrast paper where you have kind of like 2 parallel lines that go out to infinity and never meet. That's not what we want you to do. As you can see, it's a convergent structure, which I think led to another kind of misunderstanding where I think some people wanted it to be sort of like a death match, like Alexander Pope and Arnie Duncan, in the cage match with Mean Gene Okerlund. That also, while it's an exciting mental image, is not what we're asking you to do on this paper. And then there's a third kind of misunderstanding, I think, which would be that what we're asking you to do is to somehow conflate everything that we've read so far, funnel it all into a big witch's brew, and say something about all of what we've read, which would be impossible, right? What we've read to bring it all to a head would take books and books, because really that's what we've drawn on. It's many different books that try to grab onto lots and lots of information. So instead, what we're really asking you to do is to bring together 2 really specific points to figure out how they can inform each other and what happens when you bring those together.
Yeah, so that's again sort of responding to these sort of grand ideas or compare and contrast to really sort of remind you guys that you're much farther beyond that now, right? You don't need to do those things, which are kind of crutches of analysis that take the really grained, detailed specificity that you've been working on and turn them into like broader points that nobody can really disagree with. Again, we're really asking you to find the sort of one of these central ideas. Again, remember, we're not asking you to do all, there we go, Dr. Watson. those three, so what's there? We're not asking you to do all 3 of these because that would be way more paper than you want to do in a week, right? But to go to one of these, and this is the sort of, we've given you these as analysis or practice or these sort of different approaches for what we might do with them. But they come out of these 2 sets of streams, right? Of taking data and taking an application and figuring out so what it says, and then figuring out what's the so what between those so whats, which of course now we realize that there's actually an encounter between the so what and the so what, right? That you're really sort of narrowing in your question. To go back to Bethany's question about ordering, obviously you're obviously now going to have to draw a 3rd line out, right? Once we've got that so what, it's probably going to lead to a data collation, which leads to an application, which might lead to another data collation, and so on. Now you've got 3 strands all converging in the middle. Thinking about what we've been saying about arrows and following them, you're going to have to figure out where you want to start and how to arrow out from there. But then you're also going to have to realize that you're going to have to in some ways keep coming back to that central question and then figuring out how to go back along another stream. And so that's really where one of the challenges of organizing this paper will be, is that we're not asking for you to just have 3 totally separate clumps here, that we're showing that they actually come together in this interesting place, and your job as a writer is to take the reader along a path that's going to keep that clear in their minds.
Yeah, it's a bit like one of those logic problems if those appeal to you, right? You've got a fox, a chicken, and some grain, and you're trying to cross the stream. So you have to keep on coming back to the central point. We want to say a few words to kind of wrap up this assignment and to look back over these weeks we've had and think about where we've come. So we're starting here with a Jane Austen meme, and we thought we'd do this in meme form, partly because it's fun and we like fun, but also because memes are kind of an intersection between like a general kind of wisdom that exists in our culture and a very specific kind of image that helps illustrate that. So we started this class by thinking about how literacy is really about politics, economics, gender, cognition, and or pedagogy. But now your job in the paper is to show how that universally true point is actually a point that can be illustrated, altered, proven at the most detailed level.
And of course, right, you're not going to deal with all 5 of those big 5s, right? That really probably what you're doing is identifying a particular way, say, that you see the princess talking about economics, and then use that noticing to go into what the Common Core might be saying about economics. That's something that we sort of modeled in our lecture for The Princess, and then to say, well, okay, how would this maybe change my practice of what I thought I had to teach in the classroom with a particular text, right? So this is just sort of a way to, with Jane Austen's help, look back on what we've done, but also to look onto what that can get us, right? How that can lead us to a really useful paper. We're now going to go to a couple more memes because we really like memes, because we're old and we haven't figured out the next cool technological thing, so we're stuck on memes. But that we hope will help to maybe sort of encapsulate what we've done in this course and to give you guys sort of that wrap up that it's hard to do in an online format. But this is our moment to say we've really enjoyed working with you guys this semester and we've really changed some of our ideas of what literacy and literature do, and we hope that you guys have too.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting experience, and you guys have really helped us figure out a lot of what we're doing with this approach to teaching, and I hope you've gotten something out of it too with this approach to writing.
So here's Tennyson helping us to set up really where we started this semester, and we just want to kind of remind you of maybe the full circle that we've come on. So Tennyson famously wrote In Memoriam, that extremely long series of poems about his dead friend that we talked about. "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all," which we might say our question in this class was whether is it better to be literate or to read literature, right? I mean, one of the places we started was to sort of think about where we might have an encounter with people who are interested in teaching English at the grade school and high school level, because we do come up from slightly different perspectives, right? I mean, and we sort of set this up for you guys at the beginning, that we're always sort of interested in the close reading and sort of drawing everything out of a text, rather than actually getting people to be literate or to understand why literacy has value. So we kind of wanted to start from there and to think about where those two things intersected, and where you guys who are studying both English as a practice and English as a theoretical study, where you might be on that intersection.
And here was a well-trodden path, step on our path was Frankenstein, but hopefully you won't be one of the people who forgets now that the creature can read. This meme is to remind us that literacy is really everywhere. It's when you start looking for it, it sort of comes out of the woodwork. So it's all over the place, and I think that I've found that it's a really useful tool actually for just entering into a text. Say, what is this text telling us about literacy? Turns out that a lot of them have something to say about that.
Yeah, and I mean, we did the 18th and 19th century because we are respectively 19th century and 18th century specialists, but it is, I think, as Brewer pointed out to us, a particularly interesting time to think about literacy because of the sort of massive growth of ways that you could read and available forms of literature, right? And that obviously is something that continues to be very important today with ebooks, with blogs, I mean, with so many different forms in which reading material is available. That question of what kind of values does literacy give us is going to continue to be just as important as it was for 18th and 19th century readers and monsters.
So moving back to our earliest period, the 18th century, here's Joseph de Crew reminding us that he was defining literacy before there was a Common Core. Pope was defining literacy before there was a Common Core. This is a concern that people have had for a long time. And, I don't want anybody to leave the class feeling like since the beginning of time, man has wondered about literacy, because that's not the point. The point is that at different moments, people have thought really different things about literacy for a whole host of different reasons. And that's exactly what you're going to be investigating in your papers, is the sort of most specific level at which those things happen in history, the different kinds of thinking about literacy take place.
I mean, to meme out another thing, right? Without knowing history, we're doomed to repeat it. I mean, one of the things we're sort of asking you to do is to think about your own practice as teachers and what you're being told about literacy, but to put it within a larger historical context to understand there are really different reasons and understandings of literacy, and how does having that historical sense maybe change what I think should be happening or what my actual practice is, or understanding how these things might work together.